A cowboy and his German shepherd, lost in a blizzard, found a stone hut. What waited inside shocked them. People said Jonas Walker survived that winter because he was tough. But Jonas knew the truth. He survived because his German shepherd refused to let him die with the lies he'd been living. Duke didn't find shelter that night. He found a secret Jonas was never meant to know. And once a dog uncovers the truth, a man has no choice but to follow. The wind began its warning long before Jonas Walker admitted he'd misjudged the mountain. It came low and cold across the Wyoming high country, sliding under his coat, rattling the bare branches like bones. Duke, his German shepherd, kept glancing back at him as if to say they should turn around before the storm became something alive. But Jonas pushed on. 68 years of ranch work had carved stubbornness deep into him. And the map folded in his breast pocket carried a promise he'd waited half a lifetime to face. His father had drawn it the year before he died. A thin trail marked with pencil scratches, one note written in his neat hand. Where unfinished things wait. Jonas didn't know what he was looking for, only that his father had wanted him to know something before age and time took the chance away. That was enough to get him back in the saddle, Duke trailing at his heel. Snow began as a whisper, thin flakes drifting across the ridge, catching in Duke's fur. Jonas tugged his scarf higher, squinting at the dark line of clouds building over the Tetons. The storm was coming fast. Too fast. Duke halted, his ears pricked, his body went stone still. "What is it, boy?" The dog didn't answer in sound. He answered the way only a trained shepherd could. He stepped off the trail, pressing forward with a purpose Jonas trusted more than any compass. Duke had saved him once from a bull that broke a gate and charged, saved him again when a wildfire cut across the ranch, and Jonas didn't hear the flames until Duke pulled him by the shirt. A man learned to follow instincts like that. The wind hit harder. Snow thickened into white curtains that erased sky from earth. Jonas felt the familiar punch of fear deep in his chest. He couldn't see 5 feet ahead. His horse, Brandy, fought the rising drifts, snorting, hooves slipping on hidden rock. Then the blizzard swallowed them. It came all at once, a white wall, a roar that drowned the world. Jonas leaned low in the saddle, unable to see Duke, but trusting he was still forging ahead. Ice clawed across his cheeks. His fingers went numb around the reins. It would take only one wrong step to send them sliding into a ravine they'd never climb out of. He shouted, but the storm ate the sound. He had survived cattle drives, bronco falls, and the kind of winters that killed men in their sleep. But age made every storm feel different, more personal. He felt it now, a quiet thought slipping in behind the fear. This might be how it ends. Then through the whiteout came a bark. Sharp, urgent, Duke! Jonas forced Brandy forward. Another bark, closer this time. And suddenly Duke burst through the wall of snow, eyes blazing, tail stiff, demanding Jonas follow. The dog turned and ran. They moved blind, trusting Duke's leaps through the drifts. 5 minutes, maybe 10. Time broke apart in a storm like this. Jonas lowered his head, muscles trembling, breath burning in his chest. He felt more than saw the slope beneath Brandy flatten, the wind ease by a fraction. And then Duke stopped. At first Jonas saw nothing, just swirling white. Then Duke stepped aside. There, rising from the snow like the memory of a house, stood a stone hut. Old, weathered, impossible. A curl of smoke bled from the chimney, instantly torn apart by the wind. Jonas blinked hard. Sure he was imagining it. But the dog nudged his leg, urging him off the saddle as if saying he was not hallucinating. Not this time. Jonas nearly fell when his boots hit the ground. Duke pressed against him for balance, warm and steady. Together they pushed toward the wooden door. The latch was iron. Old but solid. Jonas grabbed it with a shaking hand. It opened without resistance. Warmth rolled out like an invisible wave, wrapping over his frozen skin. Jonas stumbled inside with Duke close on his heels. The fire in the stone hearth burned bright. Logs stacked neatly beside it. On a cast-iron stove sat a pot, steam rising from its lid. The smell of stew filled the room. Fresh, not hours old, minutes. Jonas pulled off his gloves, breath fogging in the air. "Hello?" His voice echoed strangely. No answer. The room was small. One bed, one table, shelves stocked with jars and tins. Everything tidy, everything used. But no footprints on the floor near the door, no coat on the hook, no boots drying by the fire. Whoever had been here hadn't left in a hurry, but they also weren't hiding. Duke growled. Not a hostile growl, a warning. He moved toward the far wall, nose low, shoulders tense. Jonas followed his gaze. 3 photographs hung above the bed. He stepped closer, heart thudding unevenly. The first photograph showed a woman in her 20s, standing in front of this very hut. Snow behind her, eyes soft. A shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Jonas felt the breath leave his lungs. He knew that face. He had seen it in the only 2 pictures his father kept in a drawer. His mother, Clara Walker, the woman who died in a snowstorm 54 years ago. He stared, unable to think, unable to breathe. Duke pressed his head against Jonas's hand, grounding him. But what froze Jonas wasn't the photo itself. It was what hung beside it. A map. Old, yellowed, hand-drawn. The same map Jonas carried in his pocket. Except on this version, one word was added in faded ink. A word that hadn't existed on his father's. Found. Jonas staggered backward as a log cracked in the fireplace. Duke growled again, turning toward the door. And then Jonas heard it. A soft crunch in the snow outside. Someone was approaching the hut. Someone who had been here moments before they arrived. The storm howled again, rattling the window. Duke braced himself, ready. Jonas whispered, "Who the hell knows we're here?" The doorknob began to turn. Duke moved first. The moment the doorknob stilled and the wind settled back into its broken howl, the German shepherd slipped from Jonas's side and circled the hut with a silent urgency. Not barking this time, not growling. Something deeper, something older. His nose skimmed the floorboards, his paws light and precise, tracing paths Jonas couldn't see. Every muscle in Duke's body carried a purpose that made Jonas's skin prickle. Jonas closed the door but didn't throw the latch. Whoever had been out there had vanished into the storm. No more footsteps, no shadow passing the frosted window. The blizzard swallowed everything again, leaving only Duke's soft huffing as he investigated. The hut was warmer now, almost too warm. Jonas rubbed his hands, trying to shake off the last of the cold. But something else crept under his skin, a feeling he couldn't name. He'd been in hundreds of cabins and ranger huts across Wyoming. This one felt different, like he'd stepped into a memory he didn't remember living. Duke paused at a small wooden chair near the corner. He sniffed once, stiffened, and looked back at Jonas, tail low, ears pricked. Jonas felt the message in that stare. Something is wrong. "What is it, boy?" he whispered. Duke didn't move away. He simply sat and stared at the chair. Jonas approached slowly. On the seat lay a folded piece of fabric. Soft. Handmade. A shawl. No, not just any shawl. Jonas reached for it with hands that suddenly shook. He lifted it gently, letting the firelight fall across the pattern woven into the wool. It was unmistakable. Blue stripes along the edge, a small embroidered flower near one corner. Imperfect. Crooked. Exactly as he remembered. His mother had sewn that pattern onto everything she made. Jonas sat heavily, breath trapped behind his ribs. He had not seen that design since he was 14, the night the storm took her. That was the story his father had told him, the story the entire town believed. But the shawl in his hands was not 50 years old. The colours hadn't dulled, the wool hadn't thinned. It looked cared for, worn recently. Someone had held it, folded it, placed it there. Duke whined quietly, nudging Jonas's knee. "I know," Jonas whispered. "I know what it looks like." But even saying it out loud didn't make sense. His mother couldn't be alive. She couldn't have walked these mountains for decades. Yet the shawl wouldn't lie. Neither would Duke's reaction. Jonas folded it carefully and set it on the table. His heart hammered in uneven beats, the way it used to when he was bucked off a bronc and tried to stand too fast. He paced the small room, forcing himself to look at everything, with clear eyes. A tin cup sat by the sink, wet around the rim, tea leaves settled at the bottom, boot prints by the back wall. Not fresh, but not old either. A blanket draped over the bed, still holding the faint impression of a human shape. Duke moved to the far shelf, grabbed something gently in his mouth, and brought it to Jonas. He dropped it at his feet. Jonas bent down and froze again. A leather-bound journal. The cover was old, cracked by time, but the initials carved into the front were fresh. C.W. Clara Walker, his mother's name. Jonas opened it with careful hands. The first few pages were blank. Then a note written in a script he remembered from birthday cards and grocery lists. Beautiful but firm. "Jonas, if you ever find this place, then the truth has finally reached you. I prayed it would. I prayed you would forgive what you could not understand. Come to the ridge at first thaw. There is more you must see." He read the lines again and again, until they blurred. His mother had written this. Not 50 years ago. Recently. Duke barked once, sharp, pulling Jonas out of the haze. The dog stood by the window, tail high, body tense. Jonas joined him and peered through the glass. The storm raged so fiercely it erased everything, but Duke kept watching, head tilted, ears twitching. He was tracking something Jonas could not hear. Jonas whispered, "You smell someone?" Duke's bark answered for him. Short, certain. Someone had been here moments before. Someone had left the stew hot, the fire burning, the journal waiting. Someone who knew Jonas was coming. Jonas grabbed the map from his coat, unfolding it on the table. His father's penciled lines matched the terrain exactly. But the copy in the photograph on the wall had one difference. One word scratched near the top. Found. Jonas stared at the two maps side by side. Then he noticed another detail he'd missed before. The hut in the photo wasn't buried in snow. The mountain looked different, younger, and behind the woman he recognized as his mother stood a man, broad-shouldered, holding an axe, his arm around her. The kind of pose that wasn't a neighborly moment. Something more. Jonas's mouth went dry. His father never mentioned another man. Duke moved again, pacing the doorway with a low rumble. Jonas's pulse quickened. Whoever had been watching them earlier hadn't gone far. And Duke knew it. A sudden sound hit the roof. Light, quick, not snow, footsteps. Duke growled, deep and warning. Then everything went silent. The storm pressed against the walls like a living thing. Jonas reached for the rifle propped near the door. Duke took position in front of him. The roof creaked again. Someone was up there. Jonas whispered, "This wasn't an accident." Duke braced himself. Jonas tightened his grip. And for the first time in decades, Jonas Walker felt the past reach out through the snow and grab him by the throat. Whoever had lived in this hut wasn't gone. They were waiting. For a long moment, nothing moved. The roof groaned again, that same sharp crack that had made Jonas think someone was up there. Duke stood planted, muscles tight, head tilted, listening deeper than any human ear could. Then came the answer. A heavy slough of snow slid off the far side of the roof, scraping stone on the way down. The sound rolled like a sigh, then faded back into the howl of the storm. Not footsteps, not a man stalking their shelter, the mountain shrugging off weight. Jonas let out a breath he had not realized he was holding, but Duke did not relax. His body stayed coiled, not afraid, alert, like the danger was not outside anymore, like it was inside, waiting. The fire snapped in the hearth, sending up a brief shower of sparks. Jonas set the rifle back beside the door, but did not wander far from it. He had lived too long to trust any single explanation. Duke moved away from the window, nose low again. This time he did not circle the room. He walked straight toward the back corner where the stone wall met the plank floor. There was nothing obvious there, no furniture, no clutter, just a strip of bare boards darkened by years of dust and smoke. The dog stopped, sniffed once, twice, then he started to dig. His paws raked at the wide plank, claws clicking on wood. Not wild scratching, focused, chosen. He pushed his nose into the narrow seam between two boards and huffed hard, as if trying to clear something. Jonas frowned. "Easy, Duke. What are you onto there?" The shepherd ignored him. He stepped back, then lunged with his front paws, driving force into the seam. A dull crack answered. One of the boards shifted a fraction of an inch. Jonas was beside him in 2 steps. The board was wider than his boot, old pine worn almost black. He would have sworn it was solid. Now he could see a hairline gap where Duke had worked it loose. "Well, I will be damned," Jonas muttered. He dropped to his knees. His joints screamed at the cold wood, but he hardly noticed. He pried his fingers into the seam and pulled. Years of dust fought him. The board creaked, resisted, then lifted with a dry groan. Underneath was a shallow cavity cut neatly into the subfloor. Inside lay a small wooden box. Duke sat back on his haunches, watching Jonas with bright, expectant eyes, tail giving one short thump. "You knew this was here," Jonas said softly. "Of course you did." The box was about the size of a Bible. No lock, just a simple sliding lid. The wood was smooth from handling. Jonas lifted it out and set it on the table near the fire. His fingers hesitated on the edge for a heartbeat. Then he slid it open. The first thing he saw was cloth, a scrap of the same wool as the shawl, folded small, wrapped around something stiff. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside lay several photographs, their edges curled, their black and white tones gone soft with age. He turned the first one toward the light. A young woman stood in front of a stone hut. This hut. The same door, the same window, the outline of the same peaks behind her. Snow crusted on the roof. Wind tugged at the hem of her dress. She wore a simple coat and that familiar shawl around her shoulders. Her face hit Jonas like a blow. High cheekbones, clear eyes, a small, stubborn mouth he had seen in the mirror his whole life. The woman in the picture could have been a younger version of him with softer edges. He did not sit down. He fell. The chair caught him more by luck than aim. The photo shook in his hand. "Mum," he whispered. Mary Clara Walker looked back at him from 50 years ago. Everyone in town said she had died in a Christmas storm when he was 14. They held a funeral with an empty casket. His father stood at the front of the small church and took off his hat and did not cry where anyone could see. That had been the story, the only story. Now Mary stood there in the photograph, alive and solid, in front of a hut her son had just found half a century later. Duke edged closer and pressed his head against Jonas's thigh. Jonas let his free hand fall into the rough fur between the dog's ears, clinging to him like an anchor. "This is not possible," Jonas said, but the words had no power. The proof was touching his fingers. There were more photos. The second showed Mary leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, smile soft and shy. Her hair was longer in this one, braided and looped at the back of her neck. No snow on the roof. The mountains in the background dark against a summer sky. She was not alone in the third picture. Mary stood beside a man Jonas had never seen before. Tall, weathered, dressed in a heavy shirt and suspenders, an axe resting on his shoulder. His hand lay gentle on Mary's upper back. They stood close. Not in that stiff way strangers did, in the easy way of people who had been side by side for a long time. Someone had scrawled 2 words along the white border in a familiar, looping hand. Me and Eli. Jonas said the name quietly. Eli. Not his father. His chest tightened. He set that photo down like it burned. The last picture in the stack was different. It was smaller, the paper newer. In it, Mary sat at the table inside this very hut, a book open in front of her. Her hair had gone silver at the temples. Lines lived around her mouth now, but the eyes were the same. Alert, curious, sad and peaceful at the same time. On the back, in that same handwriting, was a date and a line. Spring, 1990. Still here. She had been alive then. While Jonas was already a grown man with a wife and a teenage boy of his own, while he rode fence lines and signed feed checks and sat at his father's bedside the year the old man died, she had been up here, in this stone hut. Still here. Jonas closed his eyes for a moment, pressing thumb and forefinger hard against the bridge of his nose. The room swayed. Duke stood and pressed closer, shoulder against Jonas's leg, ready to hold him up if he slipped. Memories flooded in. His mother humming, over bread dough. Her hand on his forehead when he ran a fever. The way she used to stare out the kitchen window toward the distant mountains, quiet in a way he did not understand as a boy. Did you miss us? He whispered to the photo. Or were we just ghosts to you like you were to us? The fire popped. Ash shifted. The hut settled around them with all its secrets. He forced himself to breathe slower. In, out. One of the first lessons on the ranch. A panicked horse was dangerous. A panicked man was not much better. If he was going to understand anything, he needed a clear head. He put the photographs back in order on the table, then checked the box again. Beneath the cloth was a bundle of paper tied with string. Not just loose pages, letters, stacked neatly, worn at the folds. The top envelope was addressed in that same hand. John Walker. His father. No stamps, no postmark. Just his father's name and the valley where they had lived. As if someone had meant to send them down the mountain by hand. Jonas hesitated, then slid the first letter free. The ink had bled slightly, but the words were still readable. John, if this reaches you, then the plan worked and I am still alive. I know you are angry. You have every right to be. But please know I did not walk into that storm to die. I walked into it to leave. Jonas stopped reading. His pulse roared in his ears. He skipped to the bottom. Mary. He flipped through the bundle. More letters, more dates. Years passing. She had written his father again and again, a life recorded on thin paper, stuffed into a box under the floor of a hut hidden in the mountains. Every part of him wanted to devour the words right there, to sit until morning and read every line, to piece together the why and how and what his parents had done to each other and to him. But a sound behind him stopped his hand. Duke was back at the corner where the floorboard had been. He was not digging this time. He was staring at the space beneath, ears angled forward, body leaning toward the darkness. Jonas bent down and held his breath. Under the remaining planks, just visible in the gap Duke had opened, was something metallic. The edge of another box, this one grey instead of wood, its corner catching the light from the fire. There is more, Jonas murmured. He put the letters back into the wooden box and stood, feeling the weight of all that unwritten history pulling on his arm. Then he set it gently on the bed and returned to the open section of floor. The storm pounded the walls. The fire burned steady. Duke stood beside him, ready. Whatever this hut had been, it was no random shelter. It was a message left in stone and paper. And Duke, nose and instincts and all, had just shown Jonas where his family's first real clue was buried. Duke stayed close as Jonas lifted the second box from beneath the floor. The metal was cold, colder than the storm outside. Dented on one corner, scratched on the lid, it looked military or government-issued. A box meant to survive weather, time, and secrets. Jonas hesitated before opening it. Not out of fear, but the sense that whatever lay inside might change everything again. He set the metal box on the table beside the wooden one and drew a long breath. The room felt smaller now, the walls pulling closer, the smoke from the hearth drifting like old ghosts. Duke watched every movement, his tail still, his ears high. Jonas slid the latch. Inside were objects arranged with deliberate care. A compass with a broken hinge, a folded topographic map, a knife with initials carved into the handle, and beneath those, tied with a strip of leather, another set of letters. Fewer than the others, but older and different. The top envelope had one name written in a strong, firm hand. Mary. Jonas paused. His father's writing had been neat and careful, each word squared like it obeyed a fence line. This was not his father's hand. This was someone else entirely. He opened the first letter. Mary, the ridge is clear today. The elk have moved south. If you want to come with me in the morning, I can show you the trail before the snow sets in again. I will leave the lantern burning so you know I made it back. Eli. Jonas stared at the signature. Eli Hartman, a mountain ranger, the man in the photograph, the man who stood beside Mary with an ease that only years together could create. Jonas felt his throat tighten. He opened another letter. Mary, I know the storm scared you last night. It scared me too. But we are safe here. You made the right choice. And your boy will understand one day. One day he will come find you. I believe that with everything I have left. E. Jonas shut his eyes. The letters blurred, a pressure building behind his ribs like he had swallowed a stone. For 50 years he had pictured his mother frozen beneath drifts of snow on the ridge behind their old ranch. Now he saw her sitting at this very table, writing back and forth with a man who believed Jonas would come find her, a man who loved her enough to carve a life in these mountains with her. Jonas pressed a hand against the table to steady himself. Behind him, Duke walked to the bed and nudged something with his nose. Jonas followed. A small book lay there, bound in deer hide, the cover soft with use. He opened it. The first page was filled with names of plants scribbled in Mary's handwriting. St. John's wort, sage, wild mint. Her voice came back to him in a memory older than his ranch tools and older than the map in his pocket. If you learn the plants, you will never be lost. He remembered himself as a boy, sitting on the porch step while she held a cup of warm tea to his lips. He remembered her laugh, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. He remembered her singing at night when the wind was soft. For a moment the hut felt full of those sounds again. Jonas closed the book gently. He had spent his life believing she had vanished from him. And yet she had never vanished at all. She had moved. She had chosen. She had lived a whole second life on this mountain with another man. The truth sat heavy, but it was not cruel. It was complicated, human, real. Duke pressed his head into Jonas's palm, sensing the shift in him. "Good boy," Jonas murmured. "We're not done yet." He stood and began examining the hut with new eyes. Everything was arranged with intention. Tools sharpened and hung neatly on pegs. 2 mugs on the shelf, one smaller than the other. a stack of journals beside the stove, a pair of binoculars on the windowsill, footprints inside that did not belong to him, the faint scent of pine and wool, and something that felt like memory, something warm, not forgotten. Duke trotted to the shelf holding the journals and pawed the lowest one until it slid forward. Jonas picked it up. The first entry was dated 1968. Mary's handwriting. Firm, confident. I made it. The world is bigger up here, wider, quieter. I miss Jonas, but I could not stay. The mountain is honest. The mountain is mine. Jonas swallowed down the ache in his chest. He kept reading. Eli takes good care of the land, and of me. He says Jonas has my eyes. I hope he grows into a kind man. A steady one. I hope he forgives me. Jonas stopped. The words felt like they reached across time and wrapped around him. He closed the journal and held it for a moment before setting it gently back where it belonged. The storm outside continued to hammer the walls. Wind moaned through the window cracks. Snow hissed against the door. The hut should have felt safe, but Jonas felt a tension beneath the warmth, a pulse in the floorboards that told him he was still being watched. Duke confirmed it. The shepherd returned to the metal box, then to the door. Back to the box. Back to the door. Soft growl in his throat. Not fear, warning. Jonas checked the window. Nothing. Just white. Endless white. He turned back to the table and unfolded the topographic map from the metal box. Lines marked ridges, creeks, and valleys with precise detail. One circle was drawn near the north slope, labeled only with a single letter. Monsieur Jonas felt a jolt. The same letter scrawled on the back of one picture. The same one Mary signed her name with. He traced the map with his finger, comparing it to his father's map. Both led here. Both ended here. But this one had a continuation, a trail extending deeper into the mountains. Toward the circled mares, Jonas felt Duke's presence behind him before he heard him. The dog nudged his elbow, then looked toward the door again. His tail stiffened. His ears stood high. Every sense sharpened. Jonas followed the dog's gaze. This time he heard it too. Not snow, not wind. A faint, deliberate tap on the far wall outside the hut. Slow. 2 beats. A pause. Then one more. Duke growled, deep and certain. Jonas stepped away from the table and picked up the rifle. The storm still raged, but this sound was close. Human. Intentional. Someone else was out there. Someone who knew this hut. Someone who had a reason to return on the very night Jonas arrived. He whispered to Duke, "Stay close. Whoever they are, we're about to find out why my mother hid her life up here." Duke lowered himself, ready. Jonas tightened his grip as the tapping came again, clearer this time. The investigation had only just begun, and the mountain was not done speaking. The tapping on the wall faded again, swallowed by the storm, leaving Jonas and Duke in a silence so tight it felt like the air had shrunk. Jonas waited, rifle in hand, breath held. Nothing followed. No shadow, no voice. Just the wind clawing at the stone. Duke's growl softened, but didn't disappear. His instincts told him something still hovered close. Someone. But the mountain kept its secrets for another moment. Jonas lowered the rifle and turned back to the table. Answers weren't coming from outside. They were in this hut. In the boxes, in the journals, in the photographs, in the places Mary had touched. He reached for the stack of journals on the shelf, the ones Duke had shown him earlier. Most were written in Mary's hand, but one notebook near the bottom was different, the edges torn, the cover stitched with rawhide, thicker and rougher than the rest. He lifted it, feeling a strange weight in his chest even before he opened it. Inside, the handwriting changed. Firm, blocky, masculine. This one belonged to Eli Hartman. Jonas flipped through the first pages, the stormlight flickering across the ink. Mary arrived today, exhausted, frightened. She walked 12 miles in the snow. I heard her calling from the ridge. She did not want to go home. Jonas froze. He turned another page. She says she will only stay until morning. Says she needs the night to breathe. But she fell asleep by the fire, her hands shaking. Whatever happened down there has broken her in a way no winter storm could. Jonas felt a knot form in his throat. He kept reading. Mary is stronger than she knows. She cooks, she sings, she mends the blankets. But she looks south every evening. Looks like someone waiting for a child to walk out of the trees. Jonas swallowed hard. The image of her waiting, hoping, sitting in the doorway looking toward the life she left behind. It struck deep. Another entry. She wants to send letters. I told her I will walk them down the valley myself. She says her husband would never allow her back. I told her the boy deserves to know she is alive. Jonas flipped forward. The ink darkened. The letters sharpened. He returned today. Mary's husband. He followed my tracks. I told him she was alive. He told me to never send those letters. Said it would destroy the boy. He left with every envelope Mary gave me. Jonas's vision blurred. He blinked until the words steadied. He read the next line twice before it sank in. He said if she wanted to leave, she was already dead to them. Jonas shut the journal. Hard. Duke sensed the shift in him. Immediately. The shepherd pressed against his leg, trying to anchor him. Jonas rested a trembling hand on the dog's head. All his life, he had believed his mother died in a storm. That she didn't come back because she couldn't. That the cold had taken her away, like it took lost cattle and unlucky ranch hands. But the real storm had been his father. Duke moved again, sharp and sudden. He returned to the far wall where he had found the wooden box earlier. He sniffed along the baseboards, then pawed at a place slightly offset from the rest. The sound was different this time, a hollow knock under Duke's claws. Jonas knelt beside him, heart pounding. He pressed on the wooden panel. It shifted, a hidden compartment. "What do you smell, boy?" Duke pawed again, nose shoved into the crack. Jonas pried the panel loose. Behind it, wrapped in canvas, was another bundle of paper, thicker than the last, tied with rough twine. Jonas pulled it out. The moment he untied the string, letters spilled across the floor, dozens of them, maybe more. Some yellowed, some newer, all addressed the same way. To Jonas Walker. His breath caught. He picked one up. The handwriting made his chest twist. "My sweet boy, I hope these find you. I hope your father told you the truth. I dream of you every night. I pray the mountain winds will carry this letter down to you." He set it down, hands shaking harder. Another. "Jonas, I am still here, still alive. I want you to grow strong. I want you to ride horses and climb hills and know that you were loved every moment of your life." He opened more. "Jonas, you are 14 today. I do not know how tall you are now. Eli says boys grow fast at your age. I wonder if you still draw in the dirt with sticks like you used to. Happy birthday, my boy." Jonas pressed his palm to his forehead, bending over the letters as the room shifted and blurred. The weight of every year he had spent angry, confused, abandoned, pressed down on him all at once. He whispered, voice breaking. She never stopped writing. Duke nudged him again, gently but firmly, as if reminding Jonas to breathe. The next envelope stopped him cold. It had been torn open, resealed, torn again. The edges frayed like someone had handled it too many times. The name on the corner wasn't his. Signed for by John Walker, his father's name, in someone else's handwriting. Jonas stared at it, feeling the truth settle like a stone at the bottom of a lake. His father had received Mary's letters. Not once. Again and again. And he had never delivered a single one. Jonas sat back on the floorboards as the storm whistled through the cracks in the walls, carrying the weight of 50 lost years in its cold breath. Duke lowered himself beside him, laying his head on Jonas's knee. No sound, no bark, just presence. The kind of presence Jonas had relied on more times than he could count. He rested a hand on the shepherd's neck. "I didn't lose her," Jonas whispered. "He took her from me." It wasn't anger now, not entirely. It was something heavier, the realization that his father had lived with this truth, had carried it to his grave, had chosen silence over explanation. Duke nudged the last envelope toward Jonas's hand. The seal was unbroken, the ink darker, newer. Jonas opened it slowly. Inside was a single line. "If you are reading this, Jonas, it means Eli is gone, and I am waiting for you. No signature, no date, just a truth that hit like the cold outside." She had waited. For years. Maybe until the end. Jonas closed his eyes. Duke pressed closer, solid and warm. The core truth was no longer hidden. Mary Walker hadn't died. She had fled. Eli had protected her, and Jonas's father had erased her. The storm rumbled overhead like the mountain itself was exhaling. Jonas stood, gripping the metal box in one hand and the bundle of letters in the other. He looked toward the door. Someone else knew she was here. He said softly, "Someone still knows." Duke's ears perked. Outside, beneath the wind, another sound echoed faintly. Footsteps, slow, circling the hut. The truth was coming closer. The footsteps outside faded slowly, swallowed by the wind as if whoever stood out there had melted back into the storm. Jonas didn't move until Duke relaxed, though the shepherd's ears stayed lifted, alert to every shift in the night. Only once the silence settled again did Jonas turn back towards the hearth. That loose stone Duke had been fixated on earlier. It had to hold something else. Jonas set the metal box on the table, wiped his palms on his jeans, and walked to the fireplace. The stone was set deep into the mantel, and when he pressed his fingers under its rough edge, the cold bit straight through his skin. But the stone shifted just slightly, enough for him to pry his nails under and pull. It slid out with a low, grinding sound, revealing a narrow hollow carved deep into the wall. Inside sat a single rusted metal container, no larger than a lunchbox. It was wedged in tight, as though someone had hidden it in haste. Duke stood rigid beside him, the fur along his spine lifting. Jonas lifted the container carefully, dust and grit falling from it. Unlike the other letters and journals, this box had been sealed with wire, twisted tight. Someone had wanted this hidden more than anything else. Jonas carried it to the table and, using the tip of his knife, cut the wire loose. The lid creaked when he opened it. Inside was a stack of envelopes tied with a strip of leather, older than the rest, handled more, the corners frayed soft. Jonas recognized the handwriting instantly. It was his father's. He took the first envelope slowly, like lifting something dangerous. The paper felt thin in his hands. "Jonas, I never meant for you to read these, but if you found them, it means I failed to leave the truth buried where it belonged." Jonas paused. He could hear his father's voice in every stroke of the pen. Rough, stern, worn by ranch, years and hard winters. He kept reading. "I stopped her letters because I thought it was best. You were living your life without her. You were steady, strong. I feared if you knew she was alive, you would chase her into the mountains and lose everything." Jonas exhaled hard, like he'd been punched in the ribs. Another line. "And I was afraid you'd forgive her when I couldn't." His hand tightened on the paper. Duke let out a soft whine and rested a paw on Jonas's boot, grounding him. Jonas pulled another envelope from the bundle. This one dated much later, 15 years after Mary had disappeared, long after Jonas had become an adult. "Jonas, your mother has written again. She keeps trying. She says she wants to explain herself. I don't know what to do anymore. I envy her courage for leaving, and I hate her for it, too. I fear that if I give you her letters, I will lose you as I lost her. Jonas's throat tightened. He opened the next. You're 28 now, a grown man. I know I should give you these letters, but I can't. Maybe that makes me weak. Maybe that makes me selfish. But I've lived long enough to know that knowing the truth doesn't always bring peace. Jonas set the letter down and gripped the table with both hands. Fury had risen in him earlier when he found Mary's hidden letters. But this was different. This wasn't cruelty. This was a man breaking himself in silence. Jonas opened the final envelope in the stack. It was dated when Jonas turned 40. His father's handwriting was shakier now, trembling. Jonas, this is the last letter I'll write. I cannot bear the weight of her memory any more. She sent another letter this week. She asked if I would pass it on. I told her no. I told her you were better without the past digging its claws into you. I think I was wrong. Jonas closed his eyes. The room spun. Duke nuzzled his arm, sensing the freefall building in him. He continued reading. I kept you from her, because the thought of losing you terrified me. She left us both, Jonas. Left me first. She made a choice. And I made mine. I hope one day you understand that even the wrong choices can come from love. Jonas sat down hard. The chair legs scraped against the floor. It wasn't forgiveness that hit him first. It was grief. Grief for a mother who had tried to come back. Grief for a father who had tried to hold on. Grief for a boy stuck between two loves that had failed him in opposite directions. He looked at Duke, the shepherd's amber eyes deep and steady. You're the only one who's never lied to me, huh? Jonas said softly. Duke pressed closer, resting his head against Jonas's chest. No words, no confusion, just the solid truth of presence. Jonas rested one hand on Duke's back, fingers buried in the dog's warm fur. Outside, the storm softened, as if the mountains themselves were listening. Inside, Jonas felt everything inside him come undone. Not in a destructive way, but like tight knots finally, loosening. My mother didn't stop writing, he whispered, and my father didn't stop loving me. They just chose wrong. Duke chuffed quietly, almost a sigh. Jonas gathered every letter, his mother's heartbreak, his father's confession. He set them on the table in two stacks facing one another, like two lost voices finally meeting in the middle after 50 years of silence. He stared at them for a long moment. There was no good side to take. There was no clean truth, just broken people doing the best they could with what they had. And somehow, that hurt worse than any betrayal. Jonas leaned back, the weight of revelation sitting heavy across his shoulders. Outside, something shifted in the snow again. A slow crunch. Not threatening this time, almost hesitant. Duke sprang up, ears forward, tail stiff. Jonas stood with him, one hand on the dog's collar. The footsteps stopped just beyond the door. No knock, no voice, just a long breath, human. Tired. Jonas swallowed. Whoever you are, he said quietly, I'm done running from the truth. Duke growled low. The doorknob turned. The doorknob turned slowly, as if the person on the other side wasn't sure they were welcome. Jonas braced himself, hand on Duke's collar. Duke's muscles tightened beneath his palm, every sense locked onto the door. Then it creaked open. A rush of cold swept in, snow swirling across the floor before settling. In the doorway stood an old man, older than Jonas by maybe 10 years, wrapped in a wool coat stiff with frost. His beard was white, thick and wind-blown, his eyes sharp in a way that said he'd lived all his years outdoors. He didn't step inside at first. He didn't reach for his pockets or raise his hands. He simply looked at Jonas the way men who've seen too much look at one another. Careful, measuring, respectful. Jonas finally spoke. You're either braver than most, or you know exactly where you're standing. The old man nodded once. Name's Lars Harding. I used to run the ranger station down near Elk Pass. His voice carried the clean, clipped cadence of someone used to giving instructions in storms and emergencies. I'm not here to cause trouble. Duke didn't relax, but he didn't bark either, a guarded acceptance. Jonas motioned him in. The man closed the door gently behind him, stamping snow from his boots without waiting to be asked, as if he'd done it 100 times in this very hut. You knew this place, Jonas said. Not a question. I helped build half of it. Lars answered quietly. The other half belonged to Eli. Jonas studied him, the snow melting off Lars's shoulders and pooling on the floor. The old man's eyes drifted around the room, landing on the photographs, the journals, the letters laid out in 2 uneven stacks. His face softened. So, he whispered, you're Mary's boy. Jonas felt something twist inside him. He hadn't heard anyone call him that since he was 14. Duke stepped closer to Jonas, brushing against his leg. Watching Lars with the intensity of a dog who reads human intent better than humans do. Jonas nodded. I guess I am. Lars exhaled shakily, as though releasing breath he'd been holding for decades. He moved slowly, lowering himself onto the nearest chair. His hands trembled slightly, either from the cold or from memory. I've waited a long time to meet you, he said. Jonas didn't sit. He wasn't sure he could stay still with his heart beating the way it was. You mind telling me how you fit into all this? Lars looked at the fire before answering. Eli was my closest friend. For 30 years, the 2 of us patrolled these mountains. Before Mary came, Eli was empty. You ever met someone who's alive but not living? Jonas nodded silently. That was Eli. Lars continued. But when she arrived, it was like someone struck a match in the dark. Jonas felt Duke nudge his hand again, grounding him. Lars continued. I came up once a month to bring supplies they couldn't haul. Sometimes we'd just sit out there on the ridge and watch storms roll over the valley. Mary had a way of making this place feel warmer than the fire ever could. Jonas swallowed. And she never went back. Lars hesitated. She tried. Twice. The first time she got to the valley floor, then froze up when she saw the ranch road. The second time, she asked me to ride with her. We made it halfway down the canyon before she turned around. She said the world she came from didn't fit anymore. Said she'd break if she tried to force herself into it again. Jonas closed his eyes briefly. Duke pressed his muzzle into Jonas's palm, sensing the shift in him. Lars leaned forward. But you got to understand something, Jonas. Not a day went by she didn't think about you. Jonas's throat tightened. She left. She didn't come back for me. That's not the same thing. Lars said softly. Leaving your life and leaving your child are different wounds. She carried both. Jonas didn't respond. He felt something building, heavy and hot in his chest, like grief and anger and longing all tangled together. Lars reached for the stack of Mary's letters, the ones meant for Jonas, the ones he never received. She wrote until her hands gave out. Lars said, wrote even after Eli died. Wrote right up until the winter before she passed. For 40 years? Jonas whispered. Closer to 50. Lars replied. Jonas sat slowly, like the weight of it finally pushed him down. Duke shifted to sit beside him, leaning against Jonas's leg. She waited for you. Lars said quietly. Every spring, every thaw, she'd say maybe this was the year you'd come. She'd sit on the front step with a blanket around her shoulders and watch the ridge line. Jonas shook his head. Why would she think I'd ever find this place? She knew your father, Lars answered. Knew he'd hide everything, but she believed you'd grow old enough, strong enough, stubborn enough to start asking the right questions. Jonas stared at the fire. And she was right? Lars nodded. She always said you had her stubborn streak, and your father's loyalty. Jonas felt the sting behind his eyes and blinked it away. His voice dropped low. He kept her letters from me. I know, Lars said. He came to me once, wanted to know if she was still alive, wanted to know if she'd ever asked about him. Jonas looked at him sharply. And? She never asked about him. Lars replied, but she always asked about you. Jonas let that sink in, slowly, painfully, fully. Lars reached into his coat. His hands trembled again as he pulled out a folded piece of paper. I've carried this for 20 years, he said. Mary asked me to give it to you if you ever made it here. Jonas took it with numb fingers. The paper was worn, folded so many times it felt like cloth. He opened it carefully. Inside was a short, handwritten note in Mary's delicate script. Jonas, my boy, if the mountains brought you here, then they brought you to the truth. I hope you have lived a life full of love. I hope you can forgive me for the way I lived mine. If you are reading this, then I finally get to tell you myself. I never stopped loving you, not one single day. Mom Jonas didn't speak. Couldn't. The words blurred, reformed, blurred again. Duke eased his head into Jonas's lap, letting him grip the fur along his neck. Lars waited. Not rushing, not filling the silence. After a long moment, Jonas said quietly, Why didn't she come back? She believed she would hurt you more by returning than by staying away. Lars said, She thought you'd built a life, one she wasn't welcome in. Jonas closed his eyes. For the first time, he didn't feel the sharp sting of abandonment. What he felt was something quieter, sadness, understanding, something softer. Lars stood slowly. Storm's easing. I'll head back to my camp before dark. But I needed you to know the truth. The whole truth. Jonas looked up. Thank you. Lars paused at the door. Your mother waited for you her whole life, and I think she believed you'd forgive her in the end. Jonas looked toward the fire. I think I'm starting to. Outside, the wind calmed. Snow drifted in gentle spirals instead of violent gusts. Jonas sat with Duke beside the fire long after Lars disappeared into the trees. He held Mary's note in one hand, Duke's fur in the other. And little by little, piece by piece, the ice inside him began to thaw. By dawn the world had turned to glass. The blizzard that had raged like a living beast only hours before now lay quiet, draped across the mountains in soft, untouched layers. The trees stood heavy with frost, the sky washed pale blue, the air cold enough to bite, but gentle enough to breathe again. Jonas stepped out of the stone hut with Duke close at his side. The shepherd paused at the doorway, nose lifted to the wind, reading the world as only a dog could. His ears flicked, then relaxed. Whatever danger had lingered in the storm was gone now. The mountain felt peaceful, almost forgiving. Jonas tightened the straps on his pack. Inside it were the letters, the journals, Mary's note, Eli's words, and the metal box that held the truth his father could never speak aloud. He felt the weight of it all against his back, but for the first time it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like inheritance. He rested a hand on Duke's neck. Ready, boy? Duke leaned into the touch, then took the first step down the path, as if saying he'd been ready long before Jonas ever knew he needed this journey. They moved slowly at first, picking their way through deep snow that swallowed their boots almost to the knee. Each step sank with a soft crunch. The storm had erased their tracks from the ascent, leaving them to carve a new trail. Jonas didn't mind. Starting fresh felt right. When the hut disappeared behind them, Jonas stopped for a moment and looked back anyway. The place where Mary had lived, loved, hoped, waited. The place she had filled with letters she believed would someday reach him. The place where the truth finally caught up. He whispered into the cold air, "I found you, Mom. I'm sorry it took so long." Duke nudged his hand, reminding him he wasn't talking to the wind alone. They continued downward, the world around them opening wider with each mile. The ridgelines grew clearer, the valley shading blue and silver in the morning light. Jonas inhaled deeply, letting the cold sting his lungs. It grounded him, cleansed him. Halfway down the mountain, they reached a narrow shelf of rock where the wind had swept the snow clean. Jonas paused there, both to rest and to gather himself. Duke climbed onto a rock and stood tall, scanning the trees below. Jonas watched the dog for a long moment. Duke looked almost regal against the backdrop of snow and sky, his breath coming out in warm clouds. Strong, steady, unwavering. "You pulled me through all this," Jonas murmured. "You knew where to go, even when I didn't." Duke turned his head at the sound of Jonas's voice, then trotted back and pressed his forehead into Jonas's chest. A simple gesture, but full of meaning. "You're not alone. You've never been alone. Not as long as I'm with you." Jonas let the warmth of that truth settle deep. After decades of emotional drought, the feeling hit him with surprising strength. He scratched behind Duke's ears, and the dog closed his eyes contentedly. "Let's keep moving," Jonas said. They continued downward as the world around them softened. The harsh ridgelines turned into gentler slopes, the wind eased and the sun crested overhead. The trail widened into the familiar shape of an old ranger path, marked with faded signs and leaning pines. Jonas recognized parts of it from childhood rides with his father. That memory struck him differently now. Before, it would have carried bitterness. But now, after reading the letters hidden in the metal box, after hearing Lars's truth, it felt more complicated, more human. His father had been broken too, not by cruelty but by loss. A man trying to protect a boy from a pain he could barely protect himself from. Jonas exhaled, long and slow. Forgiveness didn't come easy, but it came. By the time they reached the valley floor, the afternoon sun had begun to melt the edges of the snowcaps. Tiny droplets clung to pine needles and sparkled like small stars. Duke trotted confidently, tail swinging, enjoying the softer earth beneath his paws. They reached a small clearing where the mountain opened to the plains beyond. Jonas stopped. This was the exact spot where he had last seen his mother. A narrow, unremarkable place, where her horse disappeared into the trees on the morning she left forever. He had been 14, angry, confused, standing beside his father who hadn't said a word. Now, 54 years later, Jonas stood there again, backed by truth, softened by years, steadied by a German shepherd who never faltered. Duke sat beside him, watching his face, sensing the shift. Jonas pulled Mary's final note from his coat. The paper trembled slightly in his hands. He read it once more. "I never stopped loving you. Not one single day." His eyes burned again, but this time the ache wasn't sharp. It was warm, a kind of ache that mends instead of breaks. Jonas folded the letter, tucked it back into his pocket, and spoke softly to the mountain. "I forgive you, Mom, and I forgive him too." The wind carried the words gently away, not with violence, but with understanding. Duke leaned against Jonas's leg, as if sealing the moment. Together, man and dog walked toward the plains, leaving the mountain behind them, but carrying the truth forward. And for the first time in Jonas Walker's long, wandering life, he didn't feel hollow. He felt whole. By the time Jonas and Duke reached town, the sun had dipped behind the buttes, casting long blue shadows across the main street of Elk Creek. The world down here felt smaller than the mountain, quieter, softer. But Jonas carried the truth with him like a second heartbeat, steady and undeniable. Duke stayed close as Jonas crossed the empty street toward the small brick house on Willow Bend. Lights glowed warm in the windows. Jonas hesitated on the porch, an old habit, pausing before stepping into a life he'd built on silence. He knocked once. The door opened almost instantly. Ben Walker stood there, taller than Jonas had ever been at his age, with the broad shoulders of a rancher, but his grandmother's gentle eyes. He froze when he saw his father, saw the exhaustion, the snow still clinging to the hem of his coat, the pack strapped tight across his back. "Dad?" Ben said, quietly. "Where the hell have you been? I've been calling for 2 days." Jonas swallowed. "I know." Ben's eyes dropped to Duke. The shepherd stood alert, calm, dusted with snow. "And what happened to him?" Jonas shook his head. "It's a long story, son." Ben stepped aside. "All right, come in." The warmth of the house washed over Jonas like a tide. Duke walked in first, nose twitching as he catalogued the room. The smell of coffee, saddle soap, pine cleaner. Familiar things. Safe things. Ben waited until Jonas sat down at the kitchen table before speaking again. "You look like you walked through hell." Jonas didn't smile. Instead, he reached carefully into his pack and laid the journals, the metal box, and the stack of letters on the table. Ben stared at them, confused. Jonas took a breath. "I found something on the mountain. Something about your grandmother." Ben blinked. "Grandma Mary, Dad. She died in a storm before you were grown. You've told me that my whole life." Jonas met his son's eyes. "That's not the truth." Silence filled the room, thick and heavy. Ben sat down slowly. "I don't understand." Jonas began to speak, not rushed, not rehearsed, but raw and steady. He told Ben everything. The stone hut, the photograph, Mary's journals, Eli Hartman, the letters she wrote for 50 years, the ones Jonas never received, the truth behind his father's choices, the pain, the forgiveness, the storm, Lars Harding's arrival, Mary's final message. As the story unfolded, Ben's expression changed. Confusion, disbelief, anger, grief, wonder. Duke sat between father and son, sensing every shift in tone, every tremor in Jonas's voice, every sharp inhale from Ben. When Jonas finished, the room fell quiet. Ben ran both hands through his hair. "Dad, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to," Jonas replied softly. "I've spent my whole life not knowing how to say any of this." Ben leaned back, staring at the letters spread across the table. "She wrote all these? For you?" "For us," Jonas said. The words felt right. She never forgot us. Ben reached for one of the envelopes but stopped, fingers hovering. "And Grandpa, he kept them all?" Jonas nodded. "He thought he was protecting me. He thought the truth would tear our family apart." Ben's jaw tightened. "Did it?" Jonas exhaled. "No, it just kept us hollow." Duke nudged Jonas's knee, sensing the heaviness settling again. Jonas rested a hand on the dog's head. After a long moment, Ben asked the question Jonas knew was coming. "What do you want to do about the hut?" Jonas looked up. His voice was steady. "Keep it." Ben frowned slightly. "Why?" "Because it's part of our story." Jonas replied, "A piece of who we are. Your grandmother lived her truth there, even if it didn't fit with the life she left behind. And Eli, he cared for her, protected her, gave her peace. Those things matter?" Ben nodded slowly. "They do." Jonas softened. "And I want you to know your roots. All of them, not just the clean ones." Ben stared at his father with a kind of awe Jonas hadn't seen since Ben was a boy. "So, what now?" Jonas opened Mary's final note and slid it toward his son. "Now we honor her." Ben read the letter in silence, his eyes glistening by the time he finished. Then he looked up. When do we go back? Summer, Jonas said. When the snow melts and the trails clear. There's more there for us to see. More for us to understand. I don't want to do it alone. Ben nodded. You won't have to. Jonas felt something loosen inside him. Something old. Something long buried. Duke stretched out at their feet with a satisfied sigh, as if he'd known this moment was coming all along. Ben reached down and gave the shepherd a gentle scratch. You kept him alive up there, didn't you? Duke gave a small chuff, the closest thing a dog could offer to the truth. Jonas smiled faintly. He kept me steady, same thing. Ben stood and put a hand on Jonas's shoulder. Dad, I'm glad you found her story, even if it breaks a little. Jonas nodded. Sometimes a broken truth is better than a perfect lie. Father and son lingered there a while longer, surrounded by the quiet weight of family history. Real, painful, tangled, but finally theirs. When Jonas rose to leave, Duke followed immediately, pressing against his leg as they stepped out into the cool evening. Jonas paused on the porch, looking back at the warm windows behind him, then up at the mountain ridge barely visible in the night sky. For the first time in his life, the past didn't pull him down. It carried him forward. Duke nudged his hand. Jonas smiled. Come on, boy. We've got a summer to plan. Summer arrived slow in Wyoming, as if the mountains needed time to forgive the long winter. Snow lines crawled higher, creeks loosened, and the trails that had once tried to swallow Jonas and Duke now lay open beneath a clear sky. 3 horses stood at the base of the ridge that morning, 1 for Jonas, 1 for Ben, and 1 for their gear. Duke trotted alongside them, tail swinging, nose in constant motion as he breathed in every memory the mountain still held. The climb wasn't easy, but it wasn't meant to be. Some places ask you to earn them. By midday, the stone hut appeared between the pines, exactly as Jonas remembered it. Quiet, weathered, waiting. Ben dismounted first, looking around with a kind of reverence Jonas recognized, the look of a man stepping into family history for the first time. Jonas rested his palm on the hut's doorway, feeling the cool grit of the stone beneath his skin. Duke sat beside him, chest rising and falling steady, as if this was his rightful place. Inside, the hut still smelled like pine smoke and old books. The journals were right where Jonas had left them. Mary's blanket hung across the chair. The empty mug still sat on the shelf, the one that had once been hers. Ben inhaled softly. Dad, it feels like she just stepped out for a walk. Jonas nodded. That's how it felt to me, too. They spent the afternoon repairing the doorway, clearing the chimney, sweeping out the dust that had gathered in the corners. Ben patched the roof where a winter branch had fallen. Jonas cleared the window so the summer light could flood in again. Duke never left Jonas's side. He walked from room to room with purpose, stopping sometimes to sniff a journal or sit by the hearth as though listening to voices lingering in the ash. At sunset, Jonas placed Mary's final note in a wooden frame and set it on the mantel. Ben watched him quietly. You're building a shrine. No, Jonas said softly. I'm building a place for the truth to live. They shared dinner outside, sitting on old stumps beneath a sky erasing itself into gold. Duke lay stretched in the grass, ears flicking at insects, his body finally relaxed in the peace the mountain offered. When darkness settled, they lit the lantern the same way Eli had decades earlier. The glow warmed the hut walls, flickering gently across the journals, the framed note, the letters neatly stacked on the table. Ben leaned back against the wall. You ever think, he asked, that maybe this place found you instead of the other way around? Jonas smiled. Maybe so. Duke lifted his head as if agreeing. A knock on the door broke the quiet. Jonas and Ben exchanged a look before Ben opened it. A woman stood outside, a local reporter holding a small camera and a notepad. A windbreaker with the Elk Creek Community Channel logo zipped up to her chin. "Sorry to bother you folks," she said. "The sheriff told us you found something unusual up here. A long-lost family story?" Jonas exhaled slowly, glancing at Duke. He stepped forward. "Yeah, something like that." The reporter motioned to the lantern-lit interior. "Do you mind if we get a quick clip? Folks in town are curious." Jonas looked to Ben, who shrugged. "Up to you, Dad." Jonas nodded. Inside the hut, the camera's red light blinked on. The reporter began. "Jonas Walker, rancher from Elk Creek, discovered this mountain hut during one of the worst blizzards of the year." "Jonas, how did you even find this place?" Jonas smiled and reached down to rest a hand on Duke's head. "I didn't," he said. He did. The reporter tilted the camera slightly. "Your dog?" Jonas scratched Duke's neck. "Sometimes a dog hears the truth long before we're ready for it." Duke looked up at him, eyes steady, warm, carrying more history than any human could speak aloud. The camera zoomed in on Duke's face, calm, loyal, holding the same quiet strength that had carried Jonas through storms both outside and inside. Jonas turned his gaze to the reporter, then directly to the camera itself. His voice dropped to something gentle but certain. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" The red light blinked off. Ben exhaled. "Well, that'll get people talking." Jonas chuckled. "That's the point." The reporter thanked them and stepped out into the twilight, making her way down the trail. Jonas lingered in the doorway after she left, watching her small flashlight drift into the trees like a floating star. Duke nudged him once, then sat beside him, shoulder pressed against Jonas's leg. "You were the compass in all this," Jonas whispered. "You brought me home." Duke didn't bark, didn't move, just leaned in a little closer. Ben joined them. "What now?" Jonas looked out across the mountains, listening to the night settle. "Now," he said, "we keep this place alive. Her story, Eli's story, our story." He looked down at Duke. "And every story a loyal dog helps tell." Duke wagged his tail, slow and certain. As the lantern flickered inside the hut, as the mountain breathed in the cooling night, as father and son stood beside the dog who guided them through storms and secrets, Jonas felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Not closure, not finality, but continuation, a legacy. He rested a hand on Duke's back and spoke softly, as if to the mountain, the sky, and anyone who might someday hear this story. If you've ever had a loyal pet, honor them, listen to them, let them lead you when you're lost. And as the screen faded to black, the final line lingered like a warm ember. Follow Duke's story and support the German Shepherd community. Your loyal companion might be waiting to tell a story of their own.